Hello, BookTube. I'm Jonathan, and today I'm going to share with you 10 sci-fi books that I think are underrated on Goodreads. Each of these books have less than 4 stars as an average rating, and I'm going to share with you A, why I love them, and B, why I suspect they might have a slightly lower average rating than some other more popular sci-fi books on Goodreads. So let's get into them, starting with Solaris by Stanislav Lem. So this one has an average rating of 3.99. We're going to work our way down the rating. So this one only just under the 4-star mark, but considering this is one of my top 10 favorite sci-fi books of all time, an absolute classic, I think it's slightly underrated. So why do I love Solaris? Well, first of all, we have an adventure to a new planet. It's kind of exciting, and as we arrive there, things are a little eerie, it's mysterious, it's creepy. The atmosphere in this book is absolutely fantastic. It's a little bit hard to judge writing style for a translation, but I really enjoyed the prose. I think Lem did a great job, as well as the translators, of creating that atmosphere, that tone. Everything was kind of, unsettling. What are we going to find next? And really, that helped us dive into the thematic elements, the psychological elements to do with our psyche, understanding both the internal and external things that are alien to us, and maybe some ways in which we should be reflecting upon things within ourselves. So I really connected with this book. I found it thoroughly enjoyable, and it threw in a few hard sci-fi elements in there as well, which I tend to be a fan of. So why do I think this maybe doesn't have a super high rating, that the 4.2 plus of some of the top sci-fi books on Goodreads? Well, it's not very plot driven. I think if you are looking for kind of a space opera adventure type thing, not that much goes on this planet at this research station that we visit. It's not really a plot focused book, it's more of an ideas book, which might not be to everybody's taste. There are also a few info dumps, and I didn't mind them. A character goes throughout this station and finds little tidbits, some clues from people that have been there before. And to me, it felt like a video game, like you're wandering around in a game like Bioshock or something, and you come across a diary or a recording. And I liked reading those, getting those little bits of information, and there were some sort kind of sciencey info dumps here and there. So that might not be to everybody's taste, but I didn't actually mind that. And it's also a book without maybe a definitive ending. I think it's a little bit open to interpretation. I found it very thought-provoking. I found I had an emotional reaction to this book, but I could see why maybe someone could get to the end of this book and be like, I'm not exactly sure what I was supposed to get out of that, and I liked grappling with that question, but it might not be for everyone. All right, up next we have Eversion by Alistair Reynolds, and I'm a big fan of Reynolds. I've read 7 of his books now, and they pretty much all hit for me, including Eversion. So in Eversion, we follow a couple of different story threads, a couple of different timelines, and for example, in the 1800s on a sailing ship, and it's a bit of a naval journey, and it's a little bit more character-based than some other Reynolds books. And as we go through this story, things aren't necessarily what they seem. Some of these threads start to converge, and some of the sci-fi concepts seep into the story. And I thought the way these things came together were brilliant. I thought Alistair Reynolds gave you just enough clues early on, so that when those reveals came, they were very satisfying. And I think Reynolds always hits with the hard sci-fi elements, and I think he took some risks here, and for me, I think they paid off. I loved, especially the back half, I loved the ending of this book. So why would this book maybe not work for everyone? Well, if you are a Reynolds fan and you're expecting some hard sci-fi, some space opera, and all of a sudden you're on some ship on the ocean, you might be like, what is this? Is this even science fiction? Well, it is. You just have to keep on reading. And I think Reynolds is a decent character writer, but it might not be his strength. I think the big ideas and the concepts are, he's otherworldly when it comes to that category. And the dialogue and the characters are decent. So I can see why the first half of this book doesn't click for everyone, but the book's only around 300 pages long, so just push through the beginning and I think you will be rewarded for your time, but this might not be what most Reynolds fans are expecting, and might be why that rating is just a little bit lower. And for our third book, we have More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon. So, Sturgeon, I think, is one of the most poetic writers in all of science fiction. I absolutely loved his prose. It was a joy to read. And in this book, we have three different parts. Each of these parts follow some different characters, which may have disabilities or supernatural abilities. And I think this book worked really well thematically in terms of the interconnectedness of things and people. And it's a book that I had a really strong emotional reaction to. It made me feel connected to the book itself, it made me feel connected to the world, and it was emotionally rewarding. So, why did maybe not everybody else have such a strong connection to this book? Well, firstly, the three different parts of the book do feel disconnected, at least when you start a new part. So, just as you might be getting into the story, just as you might be connecting to some characters, we do start a new thing. And I myself felt a little discombobulated. I thought, okay, how is Sturgeon going to tie these things together? But for me, he did it masterfully. So this is perhaps another one where you just need to put a little bit of trust in the author, and I think things will come together for you in the end. So please try it. I love More Than Human. All right, up next with an average rating of 3.93, we have To Your Scattered Bodies Go by Philip Jose Farmer. So this is a psychedelic, trippy journey. We have people seemingly wake up after death, naked, by a river, joined by people throughout the history of time. And there's these questions of, are we in the afterlife? Are we on another planet? How did we get here? What does this all mean? So there's some kind of existential questions, but it's also combined with an adventure. We have, a kind of a gang form up, a group, and they go off on an adventure down the river. So I found this to be a really interesting sort of like character-driven work. I like the sort of relationship dynamics between these different people throughout history, and real-world characters make an appearance, and I liked how kind of weird the world was, and I was invested in the mystery of finding out what was going on within Riverworld. So why might other people not have enjoyed this as much as I did? Well, I think a fair criticism of the book is that there's not enough female characters, like strong female representation in this book, and some of the characters aren't necessarily the most likable people. However, I would say that some of these characters are based on real people. One of our main characters was a bit of a playboy in real life, and so, how that person kind of acted and behaved and talked, is kind of representative of that type of character. And I felt like they were intentionally flawed. I felt like you could critique that character and sort of that, find commentary in that. But if you found them unlikable, if you found them off-putting, I don't think that's entirely unreasonable. But if that is something that you can go along with, I think this is an adventure worth going along the ride for, because some weird and strange stuff happens in Riverworld, and I think you might have a fun time with it. And now, with a truly egregious one, we have Frankenstein by Mary Shelley that has a 3.88 average rating. So I read this one only maybe, I think, at the start of last year. Finally got around to Frankenstein, and I'm so glad that I did. This is another one that I would put in my top 10 books of all time. I connected with this one because it's so philosophical, it's so emotional. The journey of the monster is so unlike how it is depicted in popular media, in Hollywood, etc. The monster, Frankenstein's monster, isn't just this like lumbering, groaning oaf. He's experiencing real human emotions. He's very lonely. He's very intellectual, and he kind of learns about humanity from a distance through reading and things, but struggles to socially connect, emotionally connect. And there's a lot of really heavy-hitting things in this book to do with loss and regret, and of course, Dr. Frankenstein's hubris. And I think this is a masterfully written work with some incredibly descriptive and poetic language. So why isn't everybody on board with Frankenstein? Well, I will say, for me, someone that has read a little bit of classics, but it had been a while since I had done so, the first, 30 or 40 pages did take me a little bit to get into, just because of the writing style. If you're not someone that reads a lot of classics, it might read a little slow or a little dense, but there was this kind of turning point for me where it clicked around that 30 or 40 page mark, and from then on, I was just able to get into it and really enjoy. Other than the writing style, I'm not sure what there is to critique or struggle with in Frankenstein. I just think it's one of the best pieces of literature ever. If you have a theory, put it in the comments. Let me know. And just quickly before we get to our next book, if you're interested in discussing any of these or any other sci-fi books, feel free to join us on Discord. And if you really enjoy this kind of content, feel free to check out the perks of becoming a Patreon member in the description below, such as being able to vote for the Patron Pick of the Month. I will be spinning the quantum wheel at the end of this video in order to determine the Patron Pick of the Month for January, so stick around for that. Alright, up next we have Blood Music by Greg Bear with an average rating of 3.85. So this book reminds me a little bit of Michael Crichton, also a little bit of Frankenstein as well, in terms of we have a scientific experiment going horribly wrong. This is an examination of man's hubris as we have someone testing something in a lab and they decide to inject it into themselves in order to test it, and it is pretty fun, in my opinion, seeing the consequences of this decision. I really liked some of the harder sci-fi elements. I liked sort of the scale, how things kind of expanded as the story went on, and some of the concepts towards the end of this book just kind of blew my mind. There's stuff that I think about pretty regularly, and that's one of my favorite things about reading science fiction. So why did this maybe not connect with everyone? Well, not everyone loves hard sci-fi. Maybe some of the science felt a little dry to them. Those ideas weren't resonating as much. I felt like the characters were decently written, but it's maybe not as character-driven as some stories some readers might like it to be. And I feel the story has, I wouldn't say it's split into three parts, but I'd say the second act kind of has a distinct feel. And for some people, it's their favorite part. I felt like it was a tiny bit derivative. I preferred Act 1 and Act 3 of the book, but I was still enjoying myself while reading it. Just felt like the highlights were the bookends. So I feel like there's some minor valid criticisms of this book, but uh, overall, I think this book is pretty dang awesome, especially if you like hard sci-fi or ideas-driven sci-fi. Okay, here's one I can kind of understand. It's The Quantum Thief by Hannu Ryanimi with an average of 3.83. So this book is set in the far future. There's some crazy quantum technology. Our main character, Jean Leflambour, which, great character name, by the way, is stuck in the Dilemma prison, and every day he has to kill an alternate version of himself. And then we also follow a character, Isidore Boutrolet, a detective that is trying to solve the murder of a chocolatier. So this book is such a wild adventure. The world building is incredibly detailed, and yet almost none of the information is presented to you in an immediately understandable way. There's a lot of terminology. There's a lot of technobabble. Understanding where we are, who everyone is, how things work. These are all puzzle pieces that you are going to have to put together throughout the novel. But throughout all of the craziness, I just felt like it was a fun tale. We had a heist, we had a detective, we had some fun tropes to latch on to in amongst all of the cyberpunky craziness. And I had just such a fun time with it. It's surprisingly funny at times. I think Ryan Emi has a great sense of humor, and I found this to be an incredibly satisfying story while also enjoying the trilogy as a whole. So I think I mentioned some of the reasons why this might not work for everyone. If you don't like word salad, you're going to have a rough time, especially with the first 50 to 100 pages of this book as it introduces all of the terminology to you. And that's not for everyone. I think it's an interesting book in that I think it's hard sci-fi, but it's almost so hard that the science becomes magical. You know, if we have sort of like a hard to soft sci-fi spectrum, it almost goes so hard off the hard end, deep end, it loops around to being soft again. So I feel like some sci-fi readers will struggle with this, and it might not suit some fantasy readers, but maybe some fantasy readers would actually enjoy this because you can just kind of like picture some of the stuff that's going on as magic, and you might not feel the need to understand it. So I can definitely see different readers going one way or the other on this one, but for me, it just hit. I had a phenomenal time with this one. I feel like it is polarizing, but it's worth giving it a go because I feel like if it does hit for you, like for me, it's going to be a big, big hit. Okay, moving on. With an average of 3.83, we have Dying Inside by Robert Silverberg. So this book follows the character David Selig, who has the power of telepathy. However, unfortunately, that power is starting to disappear, it's fading, and he's starting to realize he never really did anything that much with his life, anything of any consequence, any importance, and he feels like he wasted this power, he feels like he wasted his time on Earth. So I found this to be a rather moving and relatable book. I didn't necessarily relate to the main character, I didn't find him all that likable, but I did relate to some of the themes, the feelings of loss and grief and regret, and you know, even though this book can be a little bit depressing at times, for me, it kind of it motivated me. It made me want to achieve things. It made me want to do more with my life. It made me want to be more appreciative of my opportunities and relationships and that kind of thing. And I also think it is written beautifully. I think Silverberg is an excellent writer, and this is the first Silverberg book that I've read, but it definitely won't be the last. I'm looking forward to reading more of Silverberg's prose. So why didn't everybody resonate with this book? Well, I think it can be a little sad, a little depressing, maybe a little nihilistic, depending on how you choose to interpret the story. And the main character, he is quite unlikable. He's a bit of a downer. He's rather selfish. He kind of has some outdated attitudes. So I can understand why some people would read this book and kind of bounce off this main character, especially because we spend so much time inside his head. But I think if you were able to learn from that character, maybe do some things differently from that character, there are still things that can be gleaned from his story, even if it is a little bit of a bleak one. Okay, for our ninth book, with an average rating of 3.74, we have Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. So, this book follows the story of an artificial friend, an artificially intelligent character that has been created in order to be a companion to a child. And it is a rather simple story. It's not super plot driven. I think some of the world building is a little bit mysterious and obtuse, but it is driven by the themes and the emotions. I think Ishiguro did such a good job of making me care about Klara, this artificial friend, an artificially intelligent character, which I think is an interesting achievement because I'm someone that's very anti AI in real life. I think AI, in terms of what it's doing in terms of creative industries, is definitely not a good thing. And as a sci-fi reader, these things tend to go wrong, right? Usually, when we read a book about certain advanced technologies, artificial intelligence, there's usually unintended consequences. However, in this book, I felt such an emotional connection to Klara. Pretty much every chapter made me want to cry. I was really touched by everything that happened in this book, and this exploration of consciousness and spirituality and trying to connect to other people and a higher power. I think this book worked really, really well. The only thing that didn't really work for me was the ending. I just wanted a little bit more. I wanted something a little bit more conclusive. I wanted something a little bit more impactful, and I'm still trying to grapple with that. And perhaps that is something that other people felt and is reflected in this average rating. I do also think that the world building being a little bit confusing, Ishiguro gives you very little puzzle pieces to put together in order to make sense of certain things. It might just be yeah, withholding, just a little bit too withholding for some readers. They might have struggled with that, and getting to the ending, and you're like, what's the message? What's the takeaway? Was this all a little bit pointless? I don't think it was pointless. I think this book is still emotionally resonant, but I can see some readers not quite getting as much out of it as people that liked it did. So there's a lot to grapple with there. Read Klara and the Sun, and I'll be interested to see what you guys think of it. And for our final book, we have The Children of Men by P.D. James with an incredibly unfair rating of 3.67. So, in this book, we are set in a near future timeline where humans stop being able to reproduce, and humanity as a society, humans as a species, are just kind of slowly fading out of existence. And this book examines, what would kind of happen practically. How would humans react to that? What would society look like? And what does that mean for humans philosophically, spiritually? How would we be impacted by such a severe event? And P.D. James is just such an excellent writer. Her prose is phenomenal. She's poetic. She's unrelenting. It's a very cold, harsh environment. The way she writes is, she doesn't hold back. Some of the lines in this book were just absolute daggers to my soul. There's things that I read in this book that I'm going to remember for the rest of my life, and for that I am very appreciative. Why didn't everyone else appreciate this book? Well, I think the main reason is probably that people watched the film first, and the film is fantastic, but the book is a little bit different. The book is definitely slower, it's more philosophical, there's very little action, the plot development is not quite as exciting. So I think if you watched the movie and then read the book hoping for the same type of experience, you might be a little bit let down. But if you go into it expecting something a bit different, being prepared to grapple with something that's maybe a little intellectual, academic, it's rewarding though. It's really, really rewarding. I love James's writing style, and I think there's a lot to take from the themes explored in this book. So, yeah, it deserves way more than a 3.67, in my opinion. If you guys read it, I hope you agree. So there you go, guys. Those are 10 books that I love that maybe don't have the highest ratings on Goodreads. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on these books, or perhaps any other sci-fi books that you think are a little bit underrated in terms of their average rating. Just before we go, it is time to spin the quantum wheel in order to find out the patron pick of the month for January. Will it be something underrated on Goodreads? Will it be something beloved? Let's find out as the quantum wheel spins, 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 and lands on, could be Titan. Titan holds up. Titan by John Varley. I believe this is part of the Big Dumb Object subgenre. It sounds like a lot of fun to me. Sounds a little weird, a little trippy. I do like that subgenre of sci-fi. So let me know your thoughts on Titan if you've read it. And if you haven't read Titan, consider joining us in the month of January. Well, there you go. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash or just gently click the subscribe button. And if you really enjoyed it, consider checking out the perks of becoming a Patreon member, where you can become one of my robots, androids, or cyborgs like Nima and New Eden, Half Ogre, Zakawe, and the underrated Column. And you can find more sci-fi content, I got it right this time, over here.